I wasn't planning to use this story, but it fits very well in our time, and it's a question that needs to be asked, no matter what your view is. It's a question that needs to be asked. My travel associate, he's here with me. When his wife was expecting, the doctor told her, 100% chance it's going to be a deformed baby. Abort it. 100% chance. Pressure and pressure and pressure till she finally left. She said, whatever the case, I'm going to have this child. And she did. This little boy is now 5 years old. He borders on being a genius. He really does. Borders on being a genius. The other day he was playing around in our house and he looks at his mother and said, God has spoken to me today that we should have lunch at Burger King. My apologies to all competitors. And he said that we should have lunch at Burger King. And the mother paused and said to him, but God hasn't told me that yet. Mothers are all trained in the same schools. And so he pauses and comes back and he says, does God have to confirm with somebody else what he tells you? He's 5. And she paused, and figuring that was her only escape, she said, I think so. So he comes back with, Mommy, are you sure you're listening to God? Story after story from this little guy. He is so far ahead of the rest of the class. They just met the teacher this week. They said, this boy is so far ahead of the rest of them, they don't know what to do with him. And yet, we think we know so much. And we have the audacity to tell a mother, do away with this child. What will we say to God when we stand before Him and complain all about the things we wanted to, and He turns to us and looks at us and says, I sent you a few million little children that would have shown you the way out of the wilderness in your wanderings, and you wouldn't even let them into your world. I know it's a point of discomfort. But it's payday someday. We teach them in our Ivy League schools that all ethics are relative. There's no absolutes. And then when they become the heads of Enron and live as if ethics are relative, we want to put them behind bars. And we think we can just keep on printing money and make our way out of it with nothing, no ontic referent. Says who? And so we manufacture an amoral lifestyle thinking there is no absolute by which to measure it against. It catches up with you. Till you find out there is such a thing as honor. Even one of the founding fathers of this nation said, democracy would destroy itself if we had no moral framework on which to base it. How do you find a moral framework horizontally? And so you go back to this day, 2,000 years ago, and he's standing before an indulgent man whose life has no moral boundaries. And he talks to him about righteousness. How does he weave this in? The only way I can think he could weave it in is this, because he does it in the scriptures. You see, he was a Hebrew by birth. He had studied in a Greek school. He was a citizen of Rome. The Hebrews have given to us our moral categories. The Greeks have given to us our philosophical categories. The Romans have given to us our legal categories. All three of them have to find a point of reference for why some things are good and some things are evil. The Hebrews found their epitome in light. The Lord is my light. He shows me. This is the light that lights everyone that comes into the world. The people that sat in darkness have seen a great light. It was the guiding clarity that was rooted in the person of God. To the Hebrews belonged this unique tradition that moral ideas do not self-sustain themselves. They're not with their feet planted in midair. They are rooted in the very person and the indestructible character of God, in whom there is no contradiction. And for the Greeks, they just had knowledge to go to, episteme, build the academies, teach philosophy, talk virtue, but it was not rooted in a person. So for the Greeks, it was knowledge. For the Hebrews, it was light. For the Romans, it was glory. Statecraft became soulcraft by designing the soul after the state. So for the Hebrews, it was light. For the Greeks, it was knowledge. For the Romans, it was glory. Here was a man who was a Hebrew by birth, a citizen of Rome who'd studied in a Greek city, and he says to them, God, who caused the light to shine out of darkness, has caused his light to shine in our hearts, to give to us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ Jesus our Lord. That is his source of righteousness. That's whom you and I preach. We present Jesus as the sum and substance of righteousness. When you think about it, there is no other personality in history to whom you can look that way. None. When I wrote my book on an imaginary conversation between Jesus and Buddha, which is called The Lotus and the Cross, I don't know how many Buddhist monks and academics I talked to. When we talked about the purity of a life, they would bring Jesus up as the quintessential example of the one who portrayed what righteousness was all about. And so we don't bring to people a set of laws. We bring to people a person. And this person comes in grace and truth to offer you and me not condemnation per se, but to offer you and me forgiveness from a self-condemning lifestyle. The moral law catches up, but he was the fulfillment of the law who turns to you and me and says, I forgive you. You've got the beauty. Alistair McGrath, with whom I have often teamed up in England, Alistair many times has said the thing he likes most about properly done apologetics is those who present Christ in all his beauty. Those who present Christ in all of his beauty. And so we come first to the point of reference. We come next to the point of relevance. He starts talking to him about self-control. Do you think Felix could connect? When you talk about self-control to anybody, you will connect with them. Because the problem with most of us is oftentimes not what we know or don't know, but that it is we don't live up to what we already do know. That is so often the malady with which you and I live. And Paul understood that. That which I want to do, I don't. That which I don't want to do, I end up doing. That which I end up doing, I detest. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of death? Self-control. I'll tell you what, if anybody could give a magic formula for self-control, they would have packed audiences everywhere they went. Our message must be relevant to the audiences that we speak to. Every time I go to China, Hong Kong now, or even to Singapore for that matter, and you see the audiences of young, successful business people in Singapore where they have made money big time, Hong Kong where business is absolutely booming and thriving, and now you see in China money coming out of the woodwork, as it were, till the tycoons and the manufacturing of goods and so on has taken on a day which prompts books like Friedman's, The World is Flat. There's a leveling of economics. In many ways, it's getting tilted where the East is now beginning to control. I mean, if we were called up to pay our debt to China, we're in trouble. In many ways, they own us now. And yet, when I sit down in front of Chinese audiences, I remember doing a roundtable discussion at their prestigious university in Beijing, the Tsinghua University, and their students are asking questions about God. They want to know who God is. They've had it with just ethics that is not so in any way empowering, which is so easily manipulated by the most powerful person in the room. They want to know about God. How do you know this God? How do you connect with this God? How do you relate with this God? Prayer, that marvelous gift that God has given to you and me to find in our solitariness that we are not alone. That God has made us for a relationship. That's what Augustine said. You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. Imagine being in a world where you're sealed in and there is no significant other. Homes without fathers pay a huge price. Think of a world without a father. That's why I like it when my Lord taught me how to pray, Our Father. And you begin immediately with a relationship. You begin immediately with a relationship. What kind of relevance do we have to offer the world today? I would suggest to you this: a community that knows how to laugh and when to weep and how to care. If we don't have a community to offer society, we have lost the last point of contact with the postmodern world. If there's one thing postmodernism still affirms, it's the community, and how we desperately need that community. It is worship that will ultimately be the most powerful form of evangelism in our world, where people know how to celebrate, how to laugh, when to weep, because they have a common connection with God that brings them to each other. Relevance. The world has got an open hand that's desperately looking for something to cling to, something to hold on to. May I suggest to you it's worship. I'll quickly define it for you and move to my last thought. Archbishop William Temple has defined worship as the submission of all of our nature to God. It's the quickening of our conscience by His holiness, nourishment of our mind by His truth, purifying of imagination by His beauty, opening of the heart to His love, and submission of will to His purpose. All this gathered up in adoration is the greatest expression of which we are capable. What William Temple told us decades ago is that the greatest hunger is fulfilled when you can bring unity amid the diversity of your life within, and have it all bound by the transcendent and the sacred. Imagination, heart, will, mind. That's what worship is all about. A church that doesn't know how to worship will soon become an irrelevant church. You can only entertain so much, after which the next building wins the prize for entertaining them much better. It's only when you're connected by the sacred that you will honor that, because you know the sacred will ultimately have your allegiance, transcending over all of the other proclivities that you and I may have to wander and get away from it all. Point of reference, point of relevance, and lastly, the point of disturbance. He told them about the judgment to come. The judgment to come. This is so hard for us to understand today. You know, when Charles Darwin renounced his faith, it wasn't because of naturalism. He struggled with that. But the thing he couldn't come to terms with was an ultimate judgment. Read his biography. He considered it, quote, a damnable doctrine. A damnable doctrine. Let me ask you this. What happens to a world where there is no justice? Is that the world you want? And when we understand that the justice of God is so breathed in by the mercy of God, by the grace of God. The last words of Muhammad: perish the Jews and the Christians, there shall be no two faiths in Arabia. The last words of our Lord: Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. It's two completely different worlds. And that's why in one, you work and you work and you work and you work and you work to earn it. And the Bible reminds us you never can. Instead, He looks at you and says, forgive the person, for they do not know what they are doing. The grace of Christ is so beautiful. There's a wideness in God's mercy, like the wideness of the sea. There's a kindness in God's justice, which is more than liberty. Do you understand that? You know who understands it best? The one who is the worst among us, when you're forgiven. That's why the woman comes with the alabaster ointment and pours it on his feet. And the Pharisee is looking there saying, if he only knew what kind of person this was, he wouldn't even let her touch him. And Jesus knew what he was thinking, and he said, I have a question for you. If a person was in debt to the tune of 50 and to the tune of 500, and both were forgiven, who would be more grateful for it? He said, the one who was forgiven 500. He said, Simon, you're looking at her. You're looking at her. She's taken that which she had and poured it on to me. as an expression of her worship, because she has been forgiven much. Last weekend, when we were holding our 25th anniversary, my daughter, who works with rescuing women from the sex trafficking industry and children with AIDS, she covers the globe with this, finding needs and then finds ways to meet them. She had brought a young woman by the name of Nolene from Cape Town, South Africa. Nolene had lived as a prostitute for many years, had children born in all of this, and I think she lost 2 of hers, and there was just one more left that she clung to and did not want to lose this child, this little boy, precious little boy. He was with her. And Naomi found a way, my daughter Naomi, to get some funds raised for Nolene to leave that horrific trade and get into another profession. And so Nolene went to a catering school and studied to become a chef. She's graduated. And in her testimony, she says, "I'm not a prostitute now. I'm not a prostitute." In her own accent, she says, "I'm a chef. I'm a chef." And her story of new value, new worth, new essence. She is no longer defined by marketing herself physically. She is defined by the values that she is expressing because of her spiritual reality and worth. And so when we share the point of disturbance, we are telling people it is the grace of Christ that is offered to you to rescue you from a life of self-destruction. Tough questions these are, tough questions. And so when he finished this point of reference, point of relevance, and point of disturbance, Felix began to feel terribly uneasy because the rational inference of it all was very clear. So he puts him aside and he says, put him away. You know why? He was hoping that he would be offered a bribe by Paul, and in offering Felix a bribe to be freed, his points of reference, relevance, and disturbance would be made of none effect. You understand what I'm saying? It will all be null and void by the fact that Paul himself had violated the moral imperatives of what he was preaching. And so I close with this illustration. Many, many years ago, I used to tell this story, and one day I bumped into a man who said, "I know exactly who you're talking about. You're talking about my grandmother." It was Marie Chapin who wrote the book Of Whom the World Was Not Worthy, and she tells this story of a young evangelist by the name of Yaakov. And he used to go and do his evangelism in the villages and so on. He met a man, a skeptic by the name of Zimmerman. And Zimmerman was a hardened man, and he looked at him and he said, "You know what? I've studied you all. You see the priests down the road there with their garbs, with their cloaks, with their ample crosses, all the violence, all the corruption, all the thuggery that goes on. Don't bring me the name of Christ. I've seen what you all are like. Don't talk to me." And Yaakov wanted to talk to him, not about the church, not about the priesthood, but about Christ, but Zimmerman would have nothing to do with it. So he kept coming. And one day, Yaakov said to him, he said, "Zimmerman, I have this question for you. Suppose I stole your coat, and one day I broke into a bank to rob that bank, but I wore your coat. And as I ran away from the police, they couldn't catch up with me, but they recognized you. From my coat, they said it has to be Zimmerman's coat. And so if I stole from that bank and the police recognized me because of the coat and came and arrested you, what would you say?" He'd say, "Oh, I never did it." But then he knew where this was going. And finally the day came where Zimmerman, seeing the magnificent life of Yaakov, bent his knee to Jesus Christ, got up off the dust after asking how to become a Christian, and Yaakov told him how to pray that simple prayer and commit his life to the Lord. After Zimmerman got up from his knees, he dusted it and he said, "Yaakov, thank you for being in my life. You wear his coat very well. You wear his coat very well." The ultimate apologetic is not just the point of reference, relevance, or disturbance, but how you're wearing his coat. And that's when the arguments make sense. Otherwise, they are purely in the abstract. Thank you for having me here, and God richly bless you.